The National Assembly has passed the 2023 budget with an upward review of the 20.5 trillion naira presented by President Muhammadu Buhari to 21.8 trillion naira, and that's an increase of 1.3 trillion naira. Both the Senate and the House of Representatives passed the appropriation bill in addition to a 2022 supplementary budget. Arise correspondent Tunji Olanipekun filed this report.
The oil benchmark was increased from $70 to $75 per barrel to reflect the current values in the international market. Nigeria's daily oil production was pegged at 1.69 million barrels per day, while the exchange rate is put at 435 naira to the dollar. In the budget, about 967 billion naira is for statutory transfers, 6.5 trillion for debt service, more than 8 trillion for recurrent expenditure, while about 6 trillion naira is for contribution to the development fund for capital expenditure.
It is important to state that the committee worked harmoniously with the executive arm of government and its counterpart in the House of Representatives in the processing of this bill, which ensured the collaboration of the National Assembly and the executive arm of government in the discovery and utilization of additional revenue projections to fund or improve the funding of some critical projects.
Total capital expenditure 5,972,734,929,421 naira only. Those who are the distance part of the bill say aye. Those against say nay, the ayes have. Aggregate expenditure 21,827,188,747,391 naira only. Those who are the distance part of the bill say aye. Those against say nay, the ayes have it.
The presiding officers commended lawmakers for maintaining the budget cycle of January to December, noting that the 2023 budget is the fourth and final budget to be passed by the 9th National Assembly.
The committee observed the following: the effects of the 2022 flood across the country and its attendant consequences on the roads, bridges, farmlands, and water sector necessitated the supplementary appropriation bill. MDS involved in the supplementary appropriation bill's requests are Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, Federal Ministry of Works and Housing, Federal Ministry of Water Resources.
There are about 11 laws which the bill seeks to amend, which consist of about 28 clauses. The proposals include amendment to the Capital Gains Tax, Company Income Tax, Custom, Excise and Tariff Act, Personal Income Tax, Petroleum Profit Tax, Stamp Duties Act, Value Added Tax, Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Act, Public Procurement Act, and Federal Inland Revenue Service Establishment Act, and Tertiary Education Tax Trust Fund Act.
Any action we are going to take to lay a foundation for government expenditure for 2023 should consider leveraging and then mitigating the hardship that Nigerians are facing, not to act in a way that will increase that hardship, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, this bill here seeks to make amendment, just like the DS has said, to certain provisions of very statutory legislations. Mr. Chairman, for example, clauses 19 through 26 is making very fundamental amendment to the Federal Inland Revenue Service Establishment Act. This is an act that stands the test of time, and we are using a piece of legislation that is going to last only for a year to make critical amendment to a piece of legislation that has been over time.
The National Assembly also passed a supplementary budget of 819 billion naira for the 2022 fiscal year and extended the implementation of the 2022 budget till March 31st, 2023. However, there was uproar in the Senate over requests from President Muhammadu Buhari for restructuring of a 22.7 trillion naira ways and means advances collected by the federal government from Central Bank of Nigeria over the last 10 years. The Ways and Means are advances from the central bank to the federal government for emergency funding of delayed receipt of fiscal deficit. However, senators rejected the request.
Mr. President, I don't want us to exercise any fear about what is contained in this. It's normal. We should even commend the government for bringing this information out. It's here. The Senate that is sitting on the 22nd December 2023.
The Senate then went into a closed session for about 1.5 hours and emerged with a resolution to step down restructuring of the 22.7 trillion naira Ways and Means advances.
Okay, we're now being joined by senior economist and partner SPM Professionals Paul Alaje in our Lagos studios. Hello, Paul. Very warm evening to you and welcome to Newsnight. What really would what will be concerning most Nigerians, or majority of Nigerians, it's not the usual brickbats that would go with the budget, but the implementation, knowing fully well that for more than 2 decades or about 3 decades, Nigeria has never had a balanced budget. What are your thoughts with the passage of this budget, increasing it to 21.5 trillion naira from its original submission?
That's 8.
So this budget comes with a lot of mixed feelings. First of all, let me say that we've seen that 2 budgets perhaps have been passed today. The first is supplementary budget for 2022 and also 2023 budget. One would wonder why not, instead of submitting supplementary budgets, just submit for 2023 budget, but maybe because of administrative reasons and releases of funds and all the processes 2023 budget we need to go through. So technically, we are seeing over 21 trillion budget. The question is, how are we going to finance 21 trillion naira in 2023? Of all these budgets, significant proportion of these monies will be coming from borrowing. I've seen legislature have moved the oil price from to about $75 per barrel. And I've also seen that legislature have moved output. So we're certainly looking at generating more revenue from oil. But what legislature have not done, they've refused to realize that our pipeline are really susceptible to theft. Recall that in recent time, our estimate has not been beyond 1.88 million barrels a day. So when you say you are doing 1.9, I doubt how that would be achievable. That's number one. So on quantity or output line, I doubt if we're able to achieve that. 2, on price line, I hope there will be no major negative externality next year. If there are none, but you see, it goes beyond prayer. 2020, we saw a major impact on the world due to COVID. The price even went negative. This year, even though there are high prices and people are counting gain, because of output, Nigeria is not making as much until journalists came up to reveal to us monumental fraud or theft that has been happening around the Niger Delta as regards our oil. So, but what must we do? We've seen what legislature have. At best, I think that we might see the president then come back for another supplementary budget, because it is very obvious that we will not be able to finance this budget from our revenue or even over 6 trillion that government is hoping to borrow to finance this budget. Revenue target is not realistic because if you check in 2010, we were not able to till 2022. I really don't know what we are going to do differently for us to make that in terms of generating that much revenue. I've also seen that some of the concerns that legislature raised regarding why the budget was not passed before, all of those had been abandoned, and everybody seems to be looking at going to 2023. In that budget, we have over 3 trillion naira. that will be spent on subsidy alone, over 3 trillion naira, and that is not for the entire year. It's just for 2 quarters out of 4 quarters. So half-year subsidy provision is over 3 trillion naira. A number of things in that budget that have been studied, and I have a lot of worries. I have a lot of concerns. I'm also looking whether that budget will make a major change, major turnaround for our economy, maybe something different that we have not seen in 2020, 2021, or we have not seen in 2018 or 2016. I'm still looking for, I have not found. But by and large, we must also commend government from maybe some of the projects government have added to the budget. ASU strike that lingered, government has made provision for that in the budget. So these are some of the good parts that we have seen in the budget.
All right, thank you very much, Paul Alaje, for breaking it down for us in a way that we all understand. But let's talk about these ways and means. How desirable really is this, funding option that government talks about, 23.7 trillion approval? That's what the president is seeking, approval for from the Senate. Now, let me just quickly break down the numbers. Amount is 23.7 trillion, tenure 40 years, moratorium 3 years, pricing interest rate 9%. Break it down for us so we understand what this is all about and how desirable is it?
Well, what government is saying is for central bank to technically fund government. And you have seen IMF had warned central bank against that because that will make money supply to be more. You are going to be seeing high inflation if central bank agrees to that. IMF had warned, other organizations globally have continued to warn Nigerian government, especially the Central Bank of Nigeria, if this policy is accepted and implemented. We have also seen that government might be looking at, earlier, I think 2-3 years ago, I was speaking with some of your colleagues where government said, well, we could also ask for debt forgiveness and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, most of the things they are asking for may not be allowable. The reason is because the kind of debt we have now, you can study what the Debt Management Office has published regarding the debt structure of Nigeria. Many of them are commercial in nature. Unfortunately, we just have to pay. Even if we use 20 years to rehearse madness, we certainly must get to street and demonstrate it that all the monies we have borrowed, we have to pay. There are economic sins that must be paid for, unfortunately. So I doubt if central bank, if the Senate, I think Senate at this time should look for the economic advisor to really advise them against restructuring such, because it has to do with postponing the evil day and also has to do with putting more pressure on the economy. Recall that as we speak, significant portion of that budget will go into debt service. And we're talking of over 6 trillion just to service debt. When you had 9% to it, and you're looking at postponing the goalpost in the middle of the game for 40 years in the name of restructuring, I doubt what has changed. Our ability to pay, have we improved significantly? Or have we blocked the holes where some of our revenues are leaking from? These two are very critical for us to say before we can even meet any lender. Now, because central bank is expected to be independent, and I hope that central bank and also the legislature in this case will look very, critically and carefully beyond party affiliations and beyond being an opposition to look at the numbers. If we say we want to restructure, what does it portend for our country? What does it portend for our economy? Recall, inflation figure is very high right now. And central bank is bringing many policies such as currency redesign, limiting withdrawals for people, all in a bid to reduce money supply. We cannot be making policies on one hand and be creating loopholes on the other hand. How do we achieve our policy targets? Exactly how? So I think politicians should also work with professionals so that we can have a desirable result and our inflationary numbers, which of course are not just domestically influenced. We have external factors that is pushing inflation really high, but the ones that are within our control, such as managing security issues, insecurity issues, logistic issues, transport-related issues, and now money supply that has to do with what goes through the hand of public officers. These are things that we must carefully understand and study before central bank or the Nigerian Senate or National Assembly agrees to approving for Mr. President or not.
All right. I was just going to look at the budget again from the perspective, like I mentioned earlier, that is never balanced than the rest. And the introduction of the single treasury accounts, revenue generating agencies, are they doing enough, to cut down this deficit? Is government really exploring and exploiting, areas of revenue generation, infrastructural development, the roads and the rails? I mean, when you look at the rail, it seems to be the cheapest form of transportation, and a lot of loans, were taken to construct them. Shouldn't government shore up, its revenue generating abilities from these areas? Paul?
Well, Nigerian government has potential of generating up to between 30 to 40 trillion naira today, not tomorrow. 30 to 40 trillion naira. And don't take my figure for it. Look at what the National Bureau of Statistics, which is an agency of government, has consistently reported. That even during COVID, there are sectors in our economy that continue to grow. How come? That the revenues that go to government from these sectors are reducing. When the National Bureau of Statistics report reveals that this sector are actually growing. But in terms of remittances and payment and charges and taxes to government, what is coming from these agencies are reducing. Government looks at maybe just custom and look at personal income tax in case of state, company income tax in the case of federal government for corporate. But revenue generation has gone beyond traditional methods. There are revenue opportunities that government stands to gain. But because of those people who are perhaps around government, as a revenue person, I can tell you, there are people around government who don't want it to work because of their personal gain. And that is for federal government. If you put all state government together, they stand a chance of generating between 35 to 40 trillion. And there are numbers. These are provable figures. The truth is that when government don't have enough revenue, there is limit to what government can borrow. Now we are looking at having over 40 trillion naira in debt. And we are planning a budget that is about 21 trillion naira, which means if we retire two budgets together, it's not even enough. It's just an analogy. I'm not saying we're going to do that. But I am saying that the debt burden is worrisome, is disturbing. And I don't think we can continue like this. So what we need to look at is revenue today, revenue now, and revenue this moment. And are there opportunities for us to generate this revenue? The answer is yes. I know your station usually have town hall meetings with presidential aspirants, because from the body language of President Buhari and his team, well, we've done our bit. It might not be enough. You need the other guys coming. We need to continue with the burden. The question is, these presidential candidates must tell Nigerians in specifics, what are you going to do? Don't tell us there is revenue every. What are you going to do to generate revenues? And I can tell you that the way we run our system, one way we want to enjoy benefit of socialism, but we want to make the gain of capitalism. It does not work. It's either we look at privatization process, and this privatization process will not be what I call paddy privatization, as we have in the case of energy, where government call people who are not so competent in some instances. We've seen them, they've done some other businesses, but when it comes to power, when it comes to energy provision, it's a specialized sector. But we gave it to these people anyways, maybe because of their relationship, those that were in power at the time. Today, we are unable to perform. What has government done? Even money that was paid, government has given the money that was paid to retirees or those that were working in those sectors. And it's a lot of worry for us here today.
Yes, indeed, Paul Alaje, thank you very much for that. Of course, government plans to borrow 11 trillion, sell national assets and all of that to fund the 2023 budget. Thank you very much for your insights as always.